Stop scrolling for just a moment. Imagine meeting the love of your life online, only to find that your fairy tale wasn't just a fantasy. It was a blueprint for a cage. If you've ever dreamt of a perfect escape, you need to hear this story. Dive into the nightmare of Mercedes and the Baron of Blackwood, and tell us in the comments if you would have found the courage to run. Now, turn up the volume and prepare yourself. The little glowing screen held Mercedes' entire future. She was 24, and the humid, chaotic energy of the Medellin shopping mall, where she spent 10 hours a day selling perfume and scarves, had always felt like the boundary of her world. Her life was simple, fragrant, with cheap eau de toilette, and financially stretched. She was a dreamer, and her dreams had found a voice in the chat window of a man named Angus, 9,000 kilometers away in Scotland. Angus. The name itself felt solid, ancient, like a mountain in the mist. He was 32, his profile picture a study in rugged, gentle intensity, all kind eyes, a shadow of stubble, and a hint of a smile that made her heart flutter even through the digital divide. Their conversations began innocently, midnight messaging crossing continents and time zones. They spoke about everything, the relentless sun of Colombia versus the soft, perpetual drizzle of the Scottish Highlands, the taste of arepas versus the comforting weight of a heavy tweed coat, her vibrant family life versus his quiet, seemingly solitary existence. But the solitude, he explained, was a grandeur of its own. One rainy Tuesday, 6 months into their relationship, a photograph landed in her inbox. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress carved from grey stone, ivy clinging to its towers like emerald lace. It was Blackwood Castle. He explained it was an inheritance passed down through generations of his mother's ancient family. "It's too much for one person, Mercedes," he typed. "It feels cold, empty. It needs life, it needs you." The proposal followed swiftly, wrapped in poetry and promises of a future she couldn't even have invented for herself. A future where she would be a lady, where she would never have to calculate the change for a $5 bill again, where her scent would be the moss and damp earth of a private estate, not the cloying mix of 1,000 commercial fragrances. She spent weeks poring over images he sent, cavernous, wood-paneled libraries lined with books she couldn't read, vast dining halls where ancestral portraits watched silently, a private loch that looked like liquid sapphire. The sheer scale of it overwhelmed her sense of reality until the dream became more real than the bus ride home. Her parents, grounded in the hard-won practicalities of life in Envigado, were skeptical. They had seen his photos, of course, but the distance, the speed, the almost impossible scale of his wealth, it all smelled of fantasy. But Mercedes was captivated. She used her savings, bought the ticket, and with a tearful, hopeful goodbye, she left the sun for the fog. The arrival was everything the fantasy promised. The drive from the airport took hours, winding through desolate, breathtaking landscapes that seemed to belong to a forgotten age. When the wrought-iron gates of Blackwood finally swung inward with a slow, grinding groan, Mercedes gasped. The castle was more imposing in person, a grey beast slumbering on a hill, surrounded by ancient, dark forests. Angus was waiting on the steps. He looked even better than his photos, taller, broader, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he rushed down to sweep her into an embrace that was at once protective and utterly possessive. The scent of him, wood smoke, fine wool, and something earthy wild, was intoxicating. The first week was a whirlwind of sensory overload and intense, sudden intimacy. He led her through the labyrinthine halls, pointing out crests and detailing family histories that she only half heard, too busy tracing the patterns of the intricate plasterwork and the depth of the velvet curtains. The castle was cold, but Angus kept her warm. The nights were long and silent, broken only by the soft click of massive doors closing and the sound of her own joyous laughter. The consummation of their love was like an old-world romance translated into fierce, immediate passion. In a sprawling bedroom, where a canopied bed stood like a throne and the fire crackled in a hearth big enough to stand in, Angus made her feel cherished. He praised her sun-kissed skin against the white linen, murmured Spanish phrases he had learned just for her, and moved with a careful, attentive intensity that made her feel beautiful, desired, and secure. They spent hours simply touching, exploring, their bodies communicating a language of desire that felt ancient and profound, a testament to the grand, impossible love story they were living. Her memories of those days were a haze of deep kisses, whispered promises, and the heavy, exquisite weight of his body pressing her into the luxury of the sheets, sealing the pact they had made across the ocean. Her parents called on the third day, full of worry and demands to know when she would be home. Angus took the phone, spoke in his deep, authoritative baritone, and assured them, "She is safe, she is marrying me this week." And they did. The ceremony was small, rushed, conducted by a local registrar in the castle library, the only witnesses being a stern-faced elderly housekeeper, Mrs. McTavish, and a solicitor. Mercedes wore a simple white dress Angus had purchased for her, and she felt like a princess in a story, signing the document that tied her fate to this man and this place. She sent a photo, her radiant smile, Angus's proud arm around her, to her parents, who could only reply with heartbroken, financially strained apologies for their absence, and a desperate plea for her happiness. But the happiness, it turned out, was finite. The morning after the wedding, day 8 of her new life, the chill of the stone crept into the bedroom and the warmth of Angus's hand was nowhere to be found. Mercedes woke alone. She found him downstairs in the library, dressed in fine tweeds, reviewing a ledger. "Ah, good. You're finally up," he said, not looking up. His voice was different, sharp, the melodic lilt replaced by a clipped, demanding tone. "Good morning, husband," she said, stepping toward him, expecting the usual embrace. He held up a hand. "No time for that, darling. You need to start earning your keep." She laughed, thinking he was joking. "Earning my keep? This is a castle, not a hostel, my love." He finally looked up and the smile was gone. His eyes were cold, flat, like the grey sea on a dead winter morning. "You don't understand, Mercedes. You signed the contract. You are here to serve. I didn't want a wife to chat with or to share a life with. I acquired a presence, an adornment, someone to manage this vast house and, more importantly, to cater to my needs whenever I have them." He pushed a small, thick book across the desk. It was a schedule. It detailed her day, hour by hour. 6:00 a.m. Prepare breakfast in the turret kitchen, Mrs. McTavish to supervise. 8:00 a.m. Tidy the drawing room and refresh the library fire. 10:00 a.m. Attend to my personal garments. 1:00 p.m. Prepare and serve lunch. The list went on, culminating in a final entry. 9:00 p.m. Attend to my needs. Mercedes felt the blood drain from her face. "Angus, what are you saying? I am your wife." "You are my chattel, Mercedes," he corrected, standing up. He was taller, broader, and infinitely more menacing than she had realized. "You are the exquisite foreign trophy I decided to procure. Did you think a simple shopgirl from Medellin could walk into a castle and simply be a lady? No. You are my housekeeper, my servant, my private possession, my own little tropical geisha, ready to please." The horror was immediate. He walked over to the antique dresser where she had placed her small suitcase. He opened it, lifted out her personal cell phone, and placed it on the floor. With a casual, brutal motion of his polished leather shoe, he crushed it. "All communication goes through me now. You will call your family on the landline only when I am present, and you will tell them you are deliriously happy. That is your sole privilege." The subsequent days dissolved into a terrifying, repetitive cycle. The castle, once a symbol of impossible romance, transformed into the most beautiful, suffocating prison imaginable. Mercedes' dreams had traded a small apartment in a bustling city for 1,000 empty rooms in a remote, inescapable wilderness. Her initial defiance was met with a cold, terrifying authority that quickly broke her spirit. Arguments were pointless. She was alone, 9,000 kilometers from anyone who cared, her very existence dependent on the man who had trapped her. The staff was minimal, the silent, stoic Mrs. McTavish, who looked through Mercedes as if she were a ghost, and the groundskeepers, who remained distant, almost invisible figures in the immense gardens. The worst hours were the evenings. The 9:00 p.m. "Attend to my needs" entry in his schedule became a daily terror. Angus saw her not as a partner, but as an object. His touch, once passionate and tender, became clinical, demanding and utterly devoid of mutual respect. He took what he wanted, when he wanted, his needs overriding her silence, her tears, and her whispered pleas. Mercedes learned quickly that resistance only prolonged the ordeal, often leading to a sharper cruelty in his words, a harsher grip on her arm. She retreated into a shell, her body going numb, her mind constructing elaborate fantasies of escape to endure the intimacy that had become a violation. She learned to plaster on a convincing, if vacant, smile whenever he was near, especially during the scripted phone calls home, where her parents listened eagerly to her forced laughter and assured them she was living the dream. In the solitude of the huge guest bathroom, often after one of his demands had been met, she would spend hours curled on the cold marble floor, shaking, weeping silently into thick linen towels, whispering her mother's name into the Scottish air. She was a ghost in the castle, her vibrant Colombian spirit dimmed to a flicker of dread. Every ancient stone, every suit of armor in the hallway, every heavy velvet drape felt like part of the mechanism of her capture. She was held by the sheer isolation, the lack of a phone, and the relentless, suffocating presence of Angus's control. The castle was supplied primarily by local businesses, delivered by a small fleet of vehicles. The most frequent visitor was a beat-up white delivery van, driven by a quiet, middle-aged man named Hamish. Hamish made the run twice a week, bringing bulk groceries, wine, and cleaning supplies. Over the months of her captivity, Mercedes's interaction with Hamish was brief, always monitored, always silent. She was required to sign the manifest in the Great Hall, always with Angus standing near the fireplace, ostensibly reading, but his peripheral vision fixed firmly on her. She had to maintain the illusion of the happy, slightly overwhelmed foreign bride. But Hamish saw. He saw the way the light had gone out of her eyes. On the day she arrived, she was a flash of color and laughter. Now, she was pale, moving with a defeated slump, her eyes red-rimmed and always looking down. He saw the way her hand trembled when she signed his clipboard. He saw how Angus would stand too close, a casual, proprietary hand, often resting on the small of her back, a gesture that spoke less of affection and more of ownership. Hamish was a man of few words, a simple man from the nearby village, but he had a kind heart and a daughter Mercedes' age. He filed away the images, the crushed spirit, the fear in her eyes, the unnatural silence of the happy bride. He never forgot. The cycle continued for almost a year, a cycle of terror, servitude, and despair. Then one Thursday morning the usual routine fractured. Angus, who rarely left the estate, received an urgent call from his solicitor regarding a sudden planning dispute over some ancient family land. He was furious, the sound of his rage echoing down the stone corridors, but he had to go. "I will be back by 3. I expect the blue suit pressed, dinner arranged, and for you to be ready to receive me," he barked, pulling on a driving coat. He confiscated the landline handset and placed it in his safe, a final measure of control. "Don't even think about it, Mercedes. The gates are locked and the woods are vast. You wouldn't last an hour." She watched his expensive black Land Rover disappear down the long winding drive. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. The quiet descended, heavy and absolute. She didn't dare move for a long time, convinced it was a test. At 11:15 a.m. the sound of an engine broke the silence. The white van, Hamish. The van pulled up to the service entrance. Mercedes rushed to the great hall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Hamish was stacking crates of bread and fresh milk on the stone floor. He glanced up, his expression neutral. "The usual." "Mrs.," he mumbled, handing her the clipboard. She took the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly the signature was illegible. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a glimmer of pity, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Now. It was now or never. She pointed to the stack of heavy, dark wool blankets he kept rolled up on the passenger seat of the van for cold deliveries. Then, she pointed to herself and then to the back of the van, her eyes wide with frantic, silent urgency. She mouthed one word, "Please." Hamish's eyes widened, then narrowed in immediate, sharp comprehension. The risk was immense. Angus was powerful, respected, and terrifying. Hamish could lose his job, his liberty, everything. But the look in her eyes, the raw animal terror, broke his resolve. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. Mercedes moved with a speed born of desperation. She grabbed a small burlap sack of old potatoes from a nearby pantry table, the heaviest thing she could carry, and tossed it into the back of the van, creating a small, temporary distraction or weight. Then she snatched up the darkest blanket, ran to the rear doors, and vaulted into the van, disappearing beneath the pile of thick Hessian cloths and spare packaging. Hamish closed the doors with a soft click. He calmly finished unloading the rest of the supplies, put the clipboard in his cab, and slid into the driver's seat. He adjusted his mirrors, checked the time, 11:32 a.m., and began the agonizingly slow drive toward the main gates, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles were white. The automated gates took a full 30 seconds to grind open. It felt like 30 years. As the van was halfway through the opening, turning onto the narrow, curving private road, Hamish saw it. In the distance, rounding the final bend before the gate, was the familiar, imposing black Land Rover. Angus. He was back early. Hamish's blood turned to ice. He kept his foot steady on the accelerator, maintaining the slow expected exit speed. In the back of the van, Mercedes heard the change in the engine sound, the slow pull of the van, the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath the tires, and then a new, louder sound, the distinct, powerful engine of the Land Rover. She was pressed beneath a mountain of coarse cloth, dust stinging her eyes, unable to see anything, but she could feel the imminent danger. The sound grew deafeningly close. She imagined the van stopping, Angus demanding a word, lifting the canvas to find her. Her heart didn't just pound, it vibrated, a terrified tremor running through her entire body. She instinctively curled tighter, making herself the smallest object possible, praying to every saint she could remember from her childhood. The two vehicles passed within a few feet of each other. Angus barely glanced at the delivery van, his mind clearly preoccupied with the land dispute. He saw Hamish, gave a brief, dismissive nod, and accelerated toward the gate controls. The van cleared the gates just as the massive ironwork began to swing closed behind it. Hamish sped up, adrenaline fueling his foot. Mercedes didn't move until the engine noise of the Land Rover was completely gone, replaced by the steady roar of the van on the main road. The pressure of the moment was so intense that when she finally allowed herself a small silent shudder of relief, she thought she might faint from the shock. Angus drove his Land Rover straight to the castle entrance, his mood foul. The planning issue was even more frustrating than he'd imagined. He slammed the car door shut, marched inside, and tossed his coat onto a chair. "Mercedes!" he roared, expecting her to appear instantly pale and subservient. Silence. He checked the library. Empty. The drawing room. Empty. The vast, cold kitchens. Only the supplies from the van were visible on the stone floor. A cold dread, far more chilling than the mountain air, began to creep into his chest. He checked their bedroom, the guest rooms, the small, hidden back staircases. Nothing. His fury mounted, growing from irritation to a monumental, self-justifying rage. How dare she? His property, his investment, his perfectly arranged life was gone. He searched for an hour, shouting her name, his voice hoarse, kicking furniture and slamming ancient doors until the castle itself seemed to tremble. He finally realized the impossible. She was not there. He ran back to the gate controls, checking the log. The last entry was the delivery van, just 15 minutes before his return. He saw Hamish's name and picture next to the exit time. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The driver must have helped her. His carefully crafted prison, secured by isolation and fear, had been breached by a simple working-class man. He grabbed his phone, his face scarlet, ready to unleash the full force of his financial and legal power on the miserable courier. But it was too late. 2 hours later, after a terrifying, high-speed drive through the winding mountain roads, Hamish pulled the white van up to the front doors of the nearest police station. Mercedes, shivering, covered in dust, and weeping uncontrollably, was guided inside by Hamish, who stood tall and resolute. "She was a prisoner, officer," Hamish stated simply, placing his hand on the young woman's shaking shoulder. "He was holding her captive in the castle. I saw the fear in her eyes for months. I helped her escape." Mercedes, despite the overwhelming cultural and language barriers, found her voice, aided by a sympathetic female officer and a rushed interpreter. She recounted the online dream, the rushed wedding, the immediate confiscation of her autonomy, the forced servitude, and the terrible, non-consensual nights. She detailed the isolation, the controlled communication, and the fear that had been her constant companion for nearly a year. The case was textbook. The crushed phone, the isolated location, the sudden disappearance, and the damning testimony of an independent witness. Hamish created an undeniable narrative. A search warrant was quickly obtained for Blackwood Castle. Angus, still raging and trying to coordinate a search for his stolen wife, was found by the police within his great hall. He was arrested on charges of domestic abuse, unlawful confinement, and sexual assault. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut on his wrists, the illusion of his power derived from the centuries of stone and the weight of his wealth shattered. The immediate aftermath was a torrent of media coverage, but for Mercedes, it was the start of healing. The Scottish state, recognizing her status as a victim of international trafficking and abuse, provided immediate consular and psychological support. The Colombian embassy was contacted, and arrangements were swiftly made. She was debriefed, protected, and treated with kindness she hadn't known since she stepped on Scottish soil. A month later, Mercedes was on a plane heading south. She carried only a small handbag, leaving the heavy tweeds and the few pieces of jewelry Angus had given her behind. She landed in the blazing, familiar heat of Medellin, falling instantly into the arms of her parents, who wept tears of relief and deep, wrenching regret for not trusting their own fears. The nightmare had lasted nearly a year measured in silent tears, forced compliance, and the cold echo of a castle that should have been a home. But it ended not with a dramatic rescue by a handsome prince, but through the simple, profound humanity of a working man, a van driver named Hamish, who chose to see the suffering in a stranger's eyes and risk everything to deliver her freedom, along with the morning bread and milk. Her life was simple again, but this time it was truly her own. She was home, and the sun felt warm and honest on her face. If you love this story and want to hear more like it, please hit that subscribe button. It truly means the world to us and helps us grow. And hey, while you're at it, let's aim for 50 likes on this video. Help us smash that goal.